Hello everyone. This time I will explain about the Ritsuryo. The word Ritsuryo is unfamiliar to those of us living in modern times. However, when studying Japanese history, this word always comes up. If at that time you continue studying without understanding the Ritsuryo, because of this, you will not be able to understand Japanese history later on. So please learn more about the Ritsuryo in this video. I will explain the Ritsuryo. Please understand that Ritsuryo is divided into two parts, Ritsu and Ryo. Ritsu is what we would call criminal law today. In other words, Ritsu is the law that punishes criminals. Ryo refers to what is now called administrative law or civil law. In other words, Ryo is a set of rules that govern politics and taxes. To give an example of this in modern times, there is a rule that you have to pay consumption tax when you buy something. This is my image of Ryo. If you don't pay your taxes, there are rules that require you to serve several years in prison or pay a fine of a certain amount of yen. This is Ritsu. You should be able to understand the Ritsuryo to some extent. In short, the Ritsuryo is similar to what we call modern laws. Let us now take a closer look at the details of the Ritsuryo. Let's take a look at how people lived at that time. First, I will explain about Ritsu. There isn't much to say about Ritsu, so I'll finish up my explanation quickly. But there's a lot to talk about with Ryo. At that time in Japan, there were broadly two types of people. These are the nobility and the commoners. What kind of life did the nobility lead at that time? What kind of life did commoners lead at that time? I will now explain them. I also have to tell a whole story that touches on both of them. Anyway, I will explain them in this order. I hope this video gives you some idea of what life was like back then. First, let's take a closer look at Ritsu. This is a story about how people were punished if they did something bad in old Japan. At that time in Japan, there were 5 types of punishment. Chi is a punishment involving being spanked on the buttocks. This was done in 5 stages, from 10 to 50 times, and a thin stick was used. Jio is a stronger version of spanking punishment. This had 5 stages, ranging from 60 to 100 repetitions, and a thick stick was used. Su is the penal form. This also has 5 stages, ranging from 1 year to 3 years. Ru is the punishment of exile to an island. This is divided into 3 stages, Kenru, Shuru, and Onru. To get a sense of their distances, let's look at them on a map. In Kenru, criminals are exiled to a place about the same distance as Echizen and Aki. In Shuru, the criminals are exiled to a place about the same distance as in Shinano and Io. At Onru, criminals are exiled to Izu or Awa. Other brands with similar distances include Hitachi, Sato, Oki, and Tosa. The final Shi is the death penalty. This involved 2 stages, hanging and beheading. If the nobility were to possess these sentences, they could have them reduced by paying money. Even among the nobility, there were sins that could not be solved with money. That is the crime called Hachigyaku. There are a total of 8 types, so it is called Hachigyaku. Crimes against the state or the Emperor of Japan are serious crimes. It's okay to understand that money can't solve the problem. This concludes the explanation of the law. Next, I will explain the Ryo and its overall content. First, I will explain how politics was conducted in the capital. Next, I will explain how politics was conducted in the local areas. Next, I will explain how Japan was divided at that time, similar to the modern-day prefectures of Japan. I will explain the politics of the center. The words you need to remember here are Niken Hasho Ichidai Gofu. To Kansas. There are 8 shows. 1 die. It is called this because it has 5 efus. I will explain this step by step. Niken stands for Gengiken and Daijyo-kan. Gengiken are people in charge of matters related to gods and festivals. Daijyo-kan is a politician. At that time, religion and politics were closely linked. There were people in the political system who played religious roles. The most senior of the Daijyo-kan is the Daijyo Daijin. However, if the Daijyo Daijin is not a suitable candidate, the position may be left vacant. In reality, the most important person is the minister of the left. Next comes the minister of the right. The minister of the left is what we would call the prime minister today. The minister of the right is equivalent to the modern-day deputy prime minister. In modern times, representatives elected by the people meet in the Dai to decide on policies. There is no such system in the Ritsuryo. Under the Ritsuryo system, the Daijyo Daijin, the minister of the left, the minister of the right, and the Dainadan were selected from among the nobility. They met and discussed policy. After getting the Emperor of Japan's permission for what they decided in the meeting, they passed it down to their subordinates and the policy was implemented. Hasio was in charge of the practical aspects of this project. Personnel matters are handled by the Ministry of Ceremonies. Military matters are handled by the Ministry of War. Each had a specific area of responsibility in which they implemented policies. However, if left unchecked, officials may not fulfill their roles. We established an agency to monitor whether officials were doing their jobs properly. This is the Danjodai. The last one I'd like to introduce is the Go-Efu, an organization that provides security around the capital and is similar to the modern-day police. The five, left and right Ijifu, left and right Hyo-Efu, and Amon-Fu, are collectively called Go-Efu. At the center, politics was conducted under such a political system. If we look at the regions, we see that special institutions are located in special areas. A special area is Kyo, the political center. Naniwa is the gateway to Kyo. This is Chikushi, the gateway to Japan. Kyo has two positions, left and right Kyoshiki. There is a Setsu office in Naniwa. The Zaifu is located in northern Kyushu. Their job was to administer and manage their respective territories. The Zaifu is especially special because it is close to the mainland. The Zaifu had the role of entertaining foreign envoys. It was also known as the distant the imperial court. Do you have an idea about politics? Next, I will explain how Japan was divided at that time. At that time, Japan was divided into 5 provinces and 7 provinces. The 5 provinces of Ki are Yamato, Yamashiro, Setsu, Kawachi, and Izumi. These 5 provinces were collectively called Kanai and were the center of Japan at the time. The 7 roads are the Tokaido, Tosando, Hokurakudo, Sanando, Sanyodo, Nankaido, and Seikaido. The largest division is the 5 provinces and 7 provinces. These were further subdivided into provinces, counties, and villages. The 5 provinces and 7 roads are what we call modern-day regions. The countries at that time were what we would call prefectures today. The counties at that time were what we would call cities, towns, and villages today. The village address at that time was what we would call an address today. Even today, there are governors and city mayors. At that time, the area was managed by representatives of the provincial governors, county governors, and village heads of the region. In this way, the Ritsuryo created a hierarchical society. A system was created to disseminate what the central government said throughout the country. Next, I will explain about the nobility. Things you should know about the nobility are the list of Japanese court ranks, positions and hereditary titles and the privileges of the nobility. Many people will remember the 12-level cap and rank system. This is a system established by Prince Shotoku. This system ranked the nobility into 12 levels based on the color and name of their crowns. After the Taika reform, the system was revised many times and eventually came to have 60 stages. With so many of them, it becomes too complicated and it's hard to understand the hierarchical relationships. So they reorganized the rankings to make them easier to understand. This is the cap rank. An image is like a level in a game. Ranks 1 to 3 are nobles, who are the nobility among nobility. The nobility number about 10 people. The 1st to 5th ranks are called nobility, and there are about 100 of them. Those ranked from 6th rank onwards and below were called canon, officials, and it is said that there were approximately 10,000 of them. Each member is assigned a position. For example, 1st place is equivalent to the Daijyo Daijin. The 2nd rank corresponds to the Minister of the Left, Minister of the Right, and Naida-Ijin. In other words, officials were appointed to government posts according to their rank. This system is called the list of Japanese court ranks, positions, and hereditary titles. The nobility had privileges. The privileges held vary depending on the rank. The nobles were given if. The rest of the nobility were given a roku. Those ranked 6th or below receive no title or stipend. There must be many people who don't know about it in Oroku. This would be like a salary in modern terms. Let me go back in time to explain. In the old days in Japan, local ruling families owned private land and people. However, when the Taika reform introduced the Kochi common say system, private land and private citizens were abolished, because the land and the people became the emperor of Japan's property. This would cause dissatisfaction among the private citizens and the nobility who owned private land. So they gave the people to them not as private property but as a salary. This is if in Oroku. In other cases, land is given to people as a salary rather than as private property. This is Yiden. The difference between if and Oroku is that the if receives direct taxes. Oroku receives taxes indirectly from the Ministry of Finance's treasury. I'm jealous that you can get a salary just for having a rank. But that's not the only privilege of the nobility. Plus, they got paid just for having a job. Shikiden refers to the rice fields given to people according to government post. Shikifu refers to the people who are given according to government post. The people who are assigned to run errands according to government post are called shikabun shijin. Did you think that the nobility of that time were rich because they received high salaries? A certain scholar seems to have calculated the salaries of nobility. The minister's annual salary at that time was about 100 million yen, converted into today's value. The nobility were exempt from taxes. The nobility were rich. After hearing stories like that, I'm sure everyone wants to become a nobility. For nobility, birth is important. Only the descendants of nobility can become nobility. This kind of system was called the Oni no sei. In other words, children were given official ranks according to the official ranks of their fathers and grandfathers. On the surface, the children and grandchildren of the nobles are nobility. The benefits of the Oni no sei were extended to the children of the nobility. The children and grandchildren of officials cannot enjoy the benefits of the Oni no sei. If you study hard and pass the national exam, the highest official rank one can receive is only 8th place. In other words, no matter how much they study, they will never come close to the level of those born into nobility. Finally, I will explain about the commoners. Commoners are the ones who are taxed. The tax system at that time was that the government first created family registers in Kicho. The country keeps track of who lives where and how old they are. The state allocates kubundin to each person in accordance with the law for rice field allotment. The system was that they were required to bring the crops they grew in their fields and other production to the capital. This is a tax called Ritsuryo. So is a tax that is paid to the government on a portion of the rice produced. Sho is a tax paid to the government on local specialty products such as silk, cloth, and thread. Yo is a tax paid in the form of cloth to the country in exchange for labor in the capital. These inheritances must be taken to the capital by oneself. The tax on this forced labor is called unkyaku. People had to pay for their own food during the journey, so many died of hunger and disease. They are also required to do compulsory labor in their respective areas. This is a tax called zoyo. In addition to this, there is also a tax for serving as a soldier in various military corps. The soldiers guarding the center were called Eji. The soldiers who guarded Kyushu were called Sakamori. Thus, the nobility lived relatively wealthy lives. The commoners suffered under heavy taxes. What did you think of this video? The Ritsuryo that I have introduced this time are laws of the nobility or the imperial court. Later, as the shogunate took over political power, the Ritsuryo gradually declined. However, the Ritsuryo did not disappear completely and continued into the early Meiji era. With that in mind, Ritsuryo is a concept that will continue to be used for a long time to come. If you forget, come back to this video and check it out. The next video is the Nara period for busy people. See you in the next video.